Hello everyone and warmly welcome to today's webinar, PSD2 plus authentication from requirements to implementation. I'm Julius Valjakka, in charge of digital and video marketing for MIPIN and Miontrust. Thank you all for joining us today. I'm glad to see so many of you here interested in our topic. And before we get started, I want to let everyone know that the phones are on mute. Also, we do encourage questions and we'll have plenty of time after the presentation to go over those. We'll be recording today's webinar and providing links to the recording in a follow-up email afterwards. Our presenters today, Mr. Markku Mehtälä, the CEO of Miontrust, and Mr. Mikko Nurmi, Head of Digital Business Solutions from Nixu. Both Markku and Mikko have a long history in online security industry and are currently active in developing modern security solutions even further. Just a short introduction of the companies. Markku and Mikko, can you give us a brief intro on Miontrust, and then Mikko, can you tell us a little bit about Nixu?
So hello, I'm Markku, the CEO of Miontrust Inc. So MIPIN and Miontrust Inc., we've been developing mobile and online authentication solutions for the past 5-6 years. We work in the banking, telecom and internet industries, helping our customers to secure their services and end users, both in logins and in online transactions and payments. In the financial sector, we are working with MasterCard and we're part of their StartPath program as a selected startup partner. Mikko.
Thanks, Markku. Nixu is an European cybersecurity company with offices currently in Finland and Netherlands. We protect our customers' business with advisory services, security solutions, and continuous security services.
Thank you, Markku and Mikko. So now that we've introduced the speakers and the companies, we can quickly go over our agenda for today. So first we start off by giving an overview of PSD2, the main requirements and various ways of how it might have an impact on the financial markets. After that, Mikko will tell us about PSD2 and API security. And then Markku will continue with PSD2 in relation to strong authentication. And he'll also give some examples on how MIPIN plans to cover the new requirements. And lastly, we wrap up the webinar with answering your questions. Okay, but at this time, I'm going to have Markku start things off with PSD overview and requirements.
All right. So PSD2, Payment Services Directive, is a set of laws and legislations defined and set by EU. So PSD2 is a continuation from the original Payment Services Directive, which was approved in 2007. So probably in 2008 already the work started to define the continuation and new legislation. The European Commission approved and proposed the new PSD2 in 2013, and then there was 2 years of preparation and lobby work, and finally the EU Parliament approved the directive in 2015. At the same time, the European Union, of course, have been consulting with the European Banking Association and European Central Bank, published recommendations for e-payments in January 2013, and EBA guidelines were published in late 2014. Both of these EBA and ECB recommendations basically require that this year already all the payments should be under these guidelines and requirements. And these are, of course, in sync with the PSD2, so they follow the same requirements. So PSD2 is still a work in progress. So the EU Parliament has agreed with the directive, but the directive has very broad and very vague statements about security and requirements. And EBA, European Banking Association, is still working on technical recommendations and specifications on how these requirements should be met. The timeline of the laws itself, there is a 2 years or 24 months of transition where each member state should approve this PSD2 as a law. So the main objectives of PSD2 are to really start to unite and integrate the European payments market. and improve the level playing field for payment service providers and enable easier access for new players. Of course, big objective is to make the online payments and electronic payments safer and more secure to protect the consumers and encourage and lower the price of payments. One big thing is that the PSD2 is considering all electronic payments. So this is not just online payments or credit card payments used internet. So it's concerning all electronic payments in EU. So PSD2 widens the scope. It's not only about the credit card payments, it's also considering telecom operators. So if the telco and mobile operator payment systems are used to purchase physical products online, then obviously they are part of this legislation. There is exception, so if the telco payment services are used for ringtones and other digital services, then this legislation doesn't apply. This also applies for payments outside of EU, so if payment provider is operating within the EU area, then this legislation concerns even if the user is paying outside of EU or consumer is paying from outside of EU to EU. Widening the scope is also widening the value chain. So PSD2 is defining a set of roles and players in the value chain, and they have given these nice acronyms for these players. So starting from the account servicing payment service provider, this is the current bank or current credit card issuer, where the end user and consumer has an account. The payment initiation service provider, PISP, today is typically the payment service providers, but in the future can be also the merchant that directly initiates the payment towards the issuer and the bank. Then a third, which is a completely new one, a new player in the legislation, is account information service provider, AISP. So this can be a third-party player that consolidates the customer's data, provides cross-banking services to consumers. So PSD2 is defining the roles and responsibilities of these players. So today the online payments are typically, there's many players in the value chain. Obviously the merchant, where the consumer is buying things, the merchant is connected to an acquirer bank, which is using the card company or exchange. And then finally there's the issuer bank that issues the payment card. One of the vision of the PSD2 is to enable also direct connections from the merchant to the actual issuer bank, which is now called ASPSP. And so the promise is to make more options for payments for consumers, make payments cheaper because there's not so many players in the value chain, etc. So it expands the reach of online payments. Not everybody has a credit card, so the PSD2 encourages and enables that the payment can be done directly as a bank payment. It proposed to simplify the online payments, so simplify the value chain, and potentially provide savings for merchants and consumers, and enables new entrants to enter the payment market. One other thing that is big in the PSD2 is the access to accounts legislation, which means that the banks and account service providers have to open an API to their accounts. Today the consumer has a relationship and accessing each different bank separately, but in the PSD2 world there can be an aggregator player that has access to the APIs of the issuing banks and provides a one unified service to the consumer. Some notes about this. So AISP can of course become a significant player in the value chain where customer and consumer could get good service and access to all of his bank accounts. This is of course to be seen whether this vision will actually materialize and how the world will change, but this is one of the big visions of PSD2. A few words about the authentication and responsibilities of the PSP. So the payment service provider who provides this payment services, PSD2 is proposing certain requirements and responsibilities for the PSP, starting from the strong customer authentication. So PSD2 defines that every electronic payments must be strongly authenticated with the end user. So strong authentication is defined by having something you own with something you know. So something you own can be a device, something you know, which can be a PIN code, or something you are, which is a biometric, a fingerprint, or a face recognition. The strong authentication must also include all the information about the payments, specific amount that is paid, and the payee. The PSP must be very wary of the user privacy, so PSP must not reveal the user's personal information. And very interesting is the requirement that the PSP must collect evidence against fraud. So basically this means that under PSD2, when the consumer is paying, and if after paying the consumer calls back and says there's this strange payment in my account, I haven't done this transaction, then it's the responsibility of the payment service provider to prove that actually this is what happened. So going over to Mikko.
Thanks, Markku. PSD2 will require banks to open up application programming interfaces or APIs for third parties. What I have understood, banks have not been too happy about this requirement. However, similar development have been seen in other industries as well. And we have seen APIs to positively affect organizations' profitability. And that's why we talk about API economy. That's one trend. Another trend related to API economy is my data, which means that people have access to their own information in organizations they do business with. Personally, I see PSD2 as a continuation to these trends affecting already other industries. And in the end, it probably will have a positive effect on the financial industry. Technical recommendations regarding PSD2 are not yet available, but I think it's reasonable to expect something like this. There will be RESTful APIs working over HTTP, which is protected with SSL. Assuming that this would be the playground, the question is how to make this secure and still maintain good customer experience. Here are some requirements PSD places for APIs. Third-party services need customer authorization and an explicit consent to access APIs. Depending on the need, the authorization can be valid for just once, or it can be permanent until revoked by customer. And authorization needs to be fine-grained, and user needs to understand the scope. And of course, customers' credentials to bank need to be kept confidential. Probably one of the most potential approaches for meeting those requirements is OAuth 2. It is a proven and open access management standard which supports the idea that bank's customer delegates access to bank's API to a third-party service. Valid key of a car is sometimes used as a metaphor for OAuth access tokens. Valid key restricts use of car to just parking it without access to trunk or glove box. Similarly, OAuth enables customers to limit third-party access to an appropriate level. And OAuth is a proven way for managing delegated access. Most of us have already used OAuth when logging into some online service using social media identities. Technology there is basically the same. In UK, financial sector has already made some suggestions on using OAuth 2 to control access in APIs. And there's a link which probably you will get later on, which contains a document about this. It's good reference for further information. So shortly how OAuth works. Trust between bank and the third-party service is based on quite lightweight model of utilization of a shared secret. Compared to some PKI solution, this is maybe less secure, but it's simple and enables a simple enrollment process for new services. And how does it look from the user perspective. When delegating access to third-party service, user never shares bank credentials with a third party. Instead, user approves request for access in bank service with a strong authentication. After approval, third party receives an access token, which is kind of a valid key. Possession of valid access token proves bank that third party service is acting on behalf of bank's customer. So what next? Expect technical recommendations to be available during next spring. And even before that, if you have any ongoing architecture or technology projects, you should consider already these coming API requirements. OAuth 2, although not yet proposed or decided, is at least a good choice for API access management. Understand that OAuth 2 is not a strict standard. The maturity in different access management products varies, and secure implementation requires skills and experience. Okay, thanks. Markku, you can continue.
Good. So continuing with the strong authentication of PSD2 and kind of comparing that, how does those requirements compare to the MIPIN solution that we have been building and proposing. So just to recap, the PSD2 requires strong authentication for every online and electronic payment transaction, meaning that the user has to have a device and something that he knows or something that is a biometric. But just brief intro on what the MIPIN solution is for you who might not know what do we do. So the MIPIN solution is a strong authentication using mobile phone and smartphone as an authentication device. What we propose is that the end users can access online services freely from any type of a device and network, and then online service is connected to a MIPIN authentication service or technology that can be also on-premise with the customer, and the MIPIN server is authenticating the user using the PKI technology. So the end user installs an app in the mobile device, the app generates the private keys and PKI keys, and then user can use that app and keys to authenticate himself and authorize transactions and payments. So to go through the main strong authentication and requirements set by PSD2, there's 5 major things that MIPIN covers. The strong customer authentication, as mentioned, dynamic link to a specific amount and payee, which is required for every transaction, access to payment account information that Mikko was presenting, ensure user privacy, data needs to be in private mode, and then finally the requirement to find evidence against fraud and proof of transaction. So to go through these requirements one by one, let's start with the strong authentication. So MIPIN is authenticating the user with strong PKI authentication. So the mobile app, which can be a banking app or a separate security app, has this PKI key, and the user is authenticated using the PKI digital signatures plus a biometrics, which can be a fingerprint or face recognition, or a PIN code in devices where fingerprint is not available. The next requirement, dynamic link to a specific amount and payee. So every transaction, there must be a clear information who is being paid and how much. In the MIPIN solution, every transaction is shown clearly that now you are paying this service for this user this amount and with this method. And every transaction is digitally signed with the PKI keys, so it becomes also proof that the user has approved this. Number 3, access to payment account information for third parties. OAuth 2 is definitely a good choice for the API layer, but to get the user authorization, MIPIN can help there. When a third-party system is accessing the user's account information, the bank system can ask the user dynamically out-of-band using the mobile phone for authorization. So user can get a push notification saying that, hey, there's a third-party system wants to access your account information, and the user can get a clear message that this system wants to access and what does it want to access for. And the user can simply, either with simple tap or fingerprint or PIN code, to authorize this access. And this can be done periodically or even every time there is an API access. Requirement number 4, the ensure user's privacy. What MePIN does is that we tokenize the user into a PKI keys. So in the user's mobile app, there is no user information or any other private information. Neither there is in the MePIN servers. User is really tokenized as PKI keys and digitally signed. And the PKI keys are then bound to the actual user in the banking or payment system. And finally, the PSPs are required to find evidence against fraud. When using MePIN as a payment authorization and authentication solution, every transaction is digitally signed, so it collects a proof that the user actually have approved this transaction, and the digital signature includes all the information that was shown to the user. So when you show the user is that this much you are paying to this person or this service, all that information is included in the digital signature. It includes that what kind of device the user used when approving, what type of method, fingerprint or PIN code, and of course what time and so on. So those were the 5 major requirements that we cover in our solution. I think we are getting to the end of the presentation, so we can take some questions.
Okay, thank you, Markku and Mikko, for the great presentation. As Markku mentioned, it's now time to take some questions. So let me just start with, I guess this is towards Markku. How does MePIN solve access to accounts situation?
So access to accounts requires end user's authorization. So when a third party is actually calling the API to try to get an access to a user account, the banking system can call the MePIN API in the backend to request the user to authorize the access to the API. And this authorization can be very, very fast because the user gets a push notification to the mobile phone. The push notification, when the user taps it, it opens the app and shows that, hey, which system is accessing your account and for what. And then the user can approve that with a simple tap or fingerprint or a PIN code.
All right, thank you, Markku. Another question, this is towards Mikko actually. What about OpenID Connect?
Okay, yeah, OpenID Connect, it's kind of more comprehensive solution for access management or standard for access management. And it's partially based on OAuth 2, whereas OAuth doesn't itself provide user authentication, but only the user authorization part. OpenID Connect provides the authentication part as well.
Thank you, Mikko. Actually, there are a few more questions. They are all directed at Markku, so Markku can actually answer to those in an order you wish.
Okay, so just to repeat the question, so there's a question, how do you secure the first identification in MePIN? So this depends on the market. So we have built solutions for various customers in different markets. First of all, when consumer is downloading the mobile app, the app generates the private keys and initializes the app. In that phase, it's still completely anonymous. So MePIN server doesn't know who the user is and who does the device belong to. So that the app and the key needs to be bound to an actual user in the banking system. And this can happen in multiple different ways. So for example, in the Nordics, people already have bank ID and account ID, so they can connect to the online bank and then in the online bank link MePIN app into their bank account. That can be done very easily by just scanning a barcode or code in the online bank. In some other markets where there are maybe not ready solutions and the infrastructure, for example, in China, we did a solution where the end user actually had to walk into a bank and show their face and papers, and then they got a code which they had to enter into the app to link the keys to the actual user. So hopefully that answers the question. There's another question for me, is there a difference in debit card and credit cards in PSD2? As far as I know, there is no difference. If they are used both in electronic mode, then there is no major difference there. And then there's a question about MePin. Whether MePin is live. MePin is live, and we do have live customers. And do you have the decline cancel rate? Not publicly available. We can take this and discuss this offline.
Okay, thank you, Markku. There is actually one more question. With PSD2, are there any increased expectations on the merchant to prove that a fraud has happened? Currently, we have to do this anyway. Is it any more difficult now?
So in PSD2, the wording is that the PSP is actually the responsible to prove of the transaction or fraud. But of course, PSD2 also defines that the merchant itself can be the payment initiator. But from a kind of my point of view, PSD2 is in a way making merchants' life easier because it puts the requirement to the payment service provider, because payment service provider has the requirement to actually authenticate the user. So now the merchant might not need to authenticate the user because the PSP has to authenticate the user. But of course, the merchant in the PSD2 can be the payment service initiator. So then the authentication requirement falls on a merchant. So it's not that maybe straightforward answer, but I think because of the requirement of strong authentication and whoever does the payment processing has to provide that.
All right, thank you, Markku. If there aren't any more questions, then what I can say is thank you, Mikko. Thank you very much for coming here with us to talk about PSD. Thanks to Markku as well. Does anybody have anything else to say? I guess not. Okay, enjoy the weekend and bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.